Oh, yeah? Okay. Perfect. Oh, your names are right up there. That's great. I would have written them on a note here. I totally agree. Yeah. I'm just wanting to welcome you.
I know, and I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, I think we'll start, and then others can just come in anytime, obviously. So I'd like to give a big welcome to our two presenters. So the first one is there at the top, Cheyenne Guthrow. So that's right here, this wonderful lady. So she's the Anti-Human Trafficking Child and Youth Worker, and they're both from the Sexual Assault Survivors Center. And then with her is Samantha Robel, her placement student, who I believe has almost done her placement. So very exciting. So we are very happy to have you here, and we are very excited to learn more about this important topic. So I'll just give it to you guys. Thank you.
Hello. So I just want to say, I know this is a very hard topic. If you guys need to walk out and take a break, please feel free to, because it can be very, very heavy. So my name is Cheyenne. I work at the Sexual Assault Survivor Center. I work with ages 12 and up who have been sexually assaulted, trafficked, or sexually exploited in our community. So this is a new position. It just started in August. Originally, we were working with 16 and up. So we like to come out and do a lot of public education on human trafficking because it is a very serious crime and it is happening here. And we need to bring awareness and we need to try and make changes to stop it.
Okay, so you might be asking yourself, what is human trafficking? So human trafficking occurs when human beings are controlled and exploited for profit. Perpetrators use force, fraud, or coercion to manipulate and establish control over individuals. Human trafficking can be broken down into different things. So there's domestic and international trafficking. So domestic trafficking is what happens here. International trafficking is when victims are taken abroad, taken into other countries, and brought elsewhere. So, defining human trafficking. So, when it comes to human trafficking, there needs to be three different means. So, there needs to be an act, so what is done. So, recruitment, transportation, the transfer of victims, harboring, or the receipt of persons. There's also the means, so how it's done. So, the threat of use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or vulnerability in a victim, giving payments or benefits to a person in control of the victim, and then there's also the purpose that needs to be there. So the purpose is why it's done. So for the purpose of exploitation, which includes exploiting the prostitution of others, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, or similar practices. So when it comes to charging someone with human trafficking, all three of these things need to be there in order for these charges to stick and for this to happen. So human trafficking is not the same as human smuggling. Human trafficking is when an individual is exploited by a trafficker. Human smuggling is when a person pays to be transported across the border. In Canada, most of the individuals who are trafficked are girls and women who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents of Canada, and a person can be trafficked anywhere, including their home country or their home community. So it can happen here, it can happen in your community, and somebody can be brought elsewhere or to a new place.
Okay, so what does it look like in Canada and Ontario? It's pretty scary. Ontario is one of the biggest hubs for trafficking. Toronto itself is the biggest place in all of Canada for trafficking. That is 3 hours down the road from us. So out of all of Canada, Toronto is 22% of all the trafficking happening in Canada. That's a huge percentage. The next percentage is 10%, and that's Halifax. So Toronto, Ontario is a huge hub for trafficking. As it says up here, 93% of police reported cases are actually domestic, Canadian-involved women, children, boys, whomever it may be. And again, it's approximately 2/3 of all of Canada's trafficking, so that's a huge statistic. A great example is there is a documentary coming out called Dark Highway. They created a photo, and in this photo, what they did was they had a private investigator look through all the ads online for any type of sex work, and they created a map showing numbers. Toronto was so high, it could not be shown on this map because in a 2.5-month period, they had over 39,000 posts for some form of sex work, and most of this sex work is not consented. They are not consenting to it. It is forced. So where does it happen? This is huge right now. Kids are on social media. It is huge. Snapchat, #1 unsafest. I do not like Snapchat. It is extremely unsafe. It is happening frequently on Snapchat because you can add random people. You can talk to random people. And if somebody doesn't have privacy settings, that person they added can now see exactly where they are and get directions to them. Think about a trafficker. That's going to be very easy for them to pinpoint where this person is and how to get to them. We also see video games. So video games is kind of an odd one. Quick example, over the summer, a mom posted a video online. Her 12-year-old daughter was playing a game called The Rec Room. And in this game, there was another youth about 11 years old talking to a 40-something-year-old man. They were planning to meet up together and hang out. Obviously, most of us may think, well, that doesn't seem right. But that's what they wanted. They were gonna go hang out, so this mom posted a video explaining with the child's username and said, if this is your child, please be aware they're planning to meet up with a 40-something-year-old man. It is happening in video games because, again, you can talk to strangers very easily. We're also seeing it in dating apps. You don't know who you're talking to. But also we're seeing it through friends and family, so familial trafficking, where a parent or a guardian will actually traffic the youth. We see intimate partner relationships, residential and or correctional facilities, so that's very common as well. Parties, bars, nightclubs, anything like that. Shopping malls, just by chance meetings. And schools, we are seeing it at schools as well. So when victims are trafficked, some locations can include private residences, motels, hotels, Airbnbs. In Sarnia, a lot of people think it's just London Line on the Golden Mile. It is not. Venetian Boulevard, there's trafficking happening there too. It's not just at the lower end motels, it is everywhere. We're also seeing it the transit routes. Again, the 400 series. It's very easy to get from here to Quebec, taking the 400 series. Something a trafficker may do, they may take a youth, get to Woodstock, meet someone there, switch vehicles, then keep heading to Toronto. That way nobody knows what vehicle they're in. And then holistic centers, body rub parlors, anything like that can actually be a cover-up for a trafficking ring. So this is something that I like to show. Anybody who has a child or a youth in their life most likely knows that Snapchat's being used. This is a website you do not need an account to access. I just want you all to keep that in mind because that is very important when we do look at this. No, this is a different one. Oh. So while we wait for this, how many people know what Snapchat is? Okay, so some people. So for those who don't know what Snapchat is, it's a social media app where you can send pictures to and from people, and these pictures get deleted. They're not necessarily, obviously, always deleted. And with this, you can send any type of photo. There's no block on it. But this app was actually made for ages 13 and up, which not many people know, because young kids are using it. There's a chat function. In this app, you can add anybody. It will give you random people to add. So this is the website here. So we are currently looking at Sarnia. This is what the Snapchat map looks like. So if you're on Snapchat, you can go into the map, and this is what it looks like. With this website, we're not signed in with an account. You can see that it has the option up top. So if we click anywhere in Sarnia, that's some random person's story. So anybody who is on Snapchat and does not have privacy settings on, anybody can see those pictures and those videos that you're posting. This is extremely unsafe. Yeah, these were all posted. So on Snapchat, when you post a story like those are, they last 24 hours. So anybody can go on and see any of these that don't have privacy settings for 24 hours. So if you're posting a video and you're tagging Lambton Mall, anybody who goes to this website can see that you're at Lambton Mall.
So you might be asking yourself, what are the trends here in Sarnia, Lambton? What does it look like here in our community? So we're finding that a lot of the online recruitment that's being done in our community is between the ages of 12 to 14, and it's happening a lot via social media, websites like Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok especially. So exploitation is being done using photos and videos, and we're also finding that a lot of the luring is being done by females. So there's this idea that Okay, so we're finding that a lot of the luring is being done by females in our community. And just in 2021, we had 38 human trafficking victims come through our doors in the center. So that's 38 human trafficking victims that are in our community who have been trafficked, who are living with the consequences or living with what they've gone through. Yeah.
So are you talking about like luring them? We definitely have some indicators on here, but you'll notice a lot of things change. And it could be something as simple as they were very outgoing and loved hanging out with friends. Now they only hang out with one person and they don't tell anybody who that person is. So something as simple as that, but I'll definitely go a little more in depth with that for sure. So I want to talk about some myths real quick. So the first one we have is sex trafficking happens overseas when girls are kidnapped and sold into sex slavery through online auctions, like in the movie Taken. That is not true. As we know, the majority is domestic. It is happening here, and it is not happening in an auction-like setting. It's happening online. If someone doesn't say that they've been trafficked, they have not been trafficked. That is not true. Somebody who exits trafficking may not even realize that they were actually trafficked. They may just think it was a domestic relationship and it was abusive, and that was it. They may not realize the extent of how bad things were for them. All traffickers are men. So Samantha was going to touch on this. So something that we see is a lot of luring by women. What they do is a woman may say, you know what, I want to leave. I don't want to do this anymore. And her trafficker goes, yeah, you can do that, but first you got to bring me 5 other girls. So one girl can leave to get 5 more in. So we're seeing a lot of luring by girls, possibly so they can get out, or because it's their boyfriend. And I use that in quotes because a trafficker is usually not a boyfriend. So their boyfriend is asking them to get these young girls to come hang out with them, to do this for them. The last one is all sex workers are victims of human trafficking. That is not true. In Canada, we do know that prostitution is legal. That being said, it is illegal to buy sex. The reasoning for this is we don't want a sex worker, say somebody who's in human trafficking, we don't want them to think that they're doing anything wrong, because they're not. Sometimes they have to make those hard choices to do what they can to live. They're in survival mode, where somebody who is buying sex, they are making that choice. So that is why the law has been changed and why it's now illegal to buy sex, but not illegal to prostitute. Okay, so we do have a video in just a minute. I want to go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs real quick. So when we look at somebody who's being trafficked or is at risk, we look at the hierarchy of needs. So if we look at this hierarchy, these are the needs that every person has to have. So love and belonging. If somebody doesn't have a family, they're in the foster system, that can put them at risk. That is a need that's not being met for them. Say for safety and security. If they're couch surfing, again, that's a need that's missing. They're gonna do what they can to get a safe place to stay. So I wanna give a little bit of a warning for this video. There are a few curse words. This video is from Toronto. It is actually one of the only videos in all of Ontario of a trafficker being interviewed. So this man in this video,
rejoice.
He's currently a trafficker and he's in jail right now.
Be mindful of what you spend.
There are thousands of stories in our city, our province, and our country. The job of the Toronto Star in our city, our province, and our country. The job of the Toronto Star investigative team is to dig deep, sometimes uncomfortably deep, to get the truth. One of the best we told this year was about human trafficking. Young girls exploited for sex, sold by Romeo pimps in fine hotels and dodgy motels. We sent a reporter and photographer to get the story.
Hot-blooded Caribbean babe, the perfect snack, every man's fantasy. It's so sad to read through advertisements like this, where a girl is posing in all these kind of sexy positions, and the reality is far from sexy. She's being beaten, branded, raped, manipulated, coerced. Some of them are having food and drinks withheld from them. These Johns, a lot of them wouldn't know that. So they'd just read an advertisement and think, here's this, sexy young girl who is doing this of her own free will. But that's actually not the case. I remember one time we were out for dinner. I was messaging some of the girls on back pages and we were just like, who is this girl? And what's her life like? And who's the person who's replying to this message? And how much different is she to me?
Excuse me, you can't do that.
Oh my God. Well, we went to the Mississauga Gates Inn because we'd spoken to a number of victims who said they'd been trafficked through there before. I remember in one interview, one of the victims told us that she'd actually been assaulted in the car park of the Mississauga Gates Inn by her trafficker. We'd seen cars doing laps around the parking lot, waiting for something.
Leaving and coming again within an hour span.
Changing the sheets, removing the trash.
At 1 a.m.
Men sitting in really flash cars, just watching movies on their iPads like they were killing time.
It just became very real. We had spent an hour or two looking for sex trafficking, and then within that time frame, we found it.
Couldn't send guys for this interview, eh?
I knew that for this investigation, I really wanted to speak to a pimp. A number of different officers came up with the name Matthew Diecko. I asked why, One of the reasons was his tattoos. You know, he has pimpin' across his knuckles and fuck all bitches on his chest. But that wasn't the only reason. They said that they believed this man was so narcissistic that he'd agree to the interview. I remember sitting in the room waiting for him to come in, and I was talking to Melissa and I was like, he has no idea why we're here or what we want, and we only have 1 hour. We have a window of an hour, and he could walk out at any moment.
I remember on the drive there, we were wondering what was going through his mind, like what he thought we wanted to speak to him about, and we were just very nervous about it.
In his interview, he looked straight at me and described how he manipulates a girl into falling in love and then breaks her enough to force her to prostitute herself and give him the money.
I'm not gonna sit here and say I've never done it. When I was younger, yeah. To be honest, it's probably what I did when I was younger. I was young. No.
So back when you were younger and you were doing this, how do you get a girl to fall in love with you and get a girl to be willing to do this?
It just happens. Like, most of these girls, like I said, they're broken. It's not hard. You just gotta answer their call. You get in there, you find the crack. I'm gonna be making money and I'll be there to take care of you. At the end of the night, you're home with me. Let's get a house, let's make a life. She'll do it.
Why will she do it?
You just sold her a dream.
It was the way he said it. It was how convincing he sounded. It was at that point in the interview that I think I got goosebumps, because that's when I realized, you know, maybe this could have happened to me.
I'm the same.
No, it's fine.
I'm just like, when I look at you, I feel like I'm talking to him.
Oh, really?
Because I know, like, when he's gonna watch it, yeah.
Right, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So I'm starting to get all nervous.
Don't, just take a breath.
Yeah.
Take a breath. After speaking to the 6 victims and hearing them describe how they fell into this trap, you know, how they became lured into this sick and twisted world, this game that they call it, it's all to do with love. They believed that these men were their boyfriends, and they believed that they loved them, and they believed that they had a future with them. And then they start talking about this world or this nightmare or this reality that they've lived. And it's just unbelievable. You know, I was just thinking, how did you go through this and get out?
We're hoping that these girls will read the article and recognize some of the similar signs that maybe they're experiencing in their lives, so that they can kind of help themselves.
Essentially, we really just want to make a difference. We want young girls to read this and think, hey, that's happening to me, and maybe I should run.
Not an easy video to watch. Does anybody have any comments, questions about that video at all? No, okay. So Matthew Dyko, he's from Toronto. He was arrested in Toronto. He had 19 charges against him. He is actually eligible to get out this December. This was only in 2015. So right now, the average length for charges for human trafficking is 8 to 10 years, which does not seem like a lot, but we need to celebrate the fact that we are getting arrests and girls are getting out because of these arrests.
Okay, so recruiting and grooming. So a big part of human trafficking, how people are being brought into this business, is through recruiting and grooming. So recruiting, traffickers target individuals with vulnerabilities. So going back to that triangle, the vulnerabilities, Maslow's hierarchy. They identify, they manipulate, and they control these vulnerabilities that the victims have. There are many different factors when it comes to sex trafficking. So traffickers are able to spot and exploit almost any vulnerability. So if they're able to see that somebody needs that basic shelter, needs some place to sleep at the end of the night, they'll give that. They'll provide that in order to build that trust with the victim. First, traffickers offer the person what they want or they need through a lure. Traffickers may pose as friends or boyfriends in order to gain the trust of their victims. So they'll say things like, nobody understands you the way I do. Or like Matthew Diaco says in that video, is I'll build the dream. I'll give them the dream that they're looking for. So when it comes to grooming and gaming, traffickers may purchase expensive items, invite victims to parties, or provide drugs and alcohol. So earlier there was that question about how are people being lured in. So what we're seeing with youth in our community is that sometimes traffickers are like, come and hang out with me, I'll give you a brand new phone. That is the invitation into that world. Victims are often in the honeymoon stage. So a trafficked person is in love with their trafficker. Their dreams are coming true. They're being showered with gifts and affection. So they think that this is the real deal. They're in that honeymoon stage. They have those rose-colored glasses on. Persons who have been trafficked rarely call what they have experienced trafficking. They often consider their trafficker to be their boyfriend because there's that sense of connection between them, and they may not recognize what is happening to them is actually a crime. So, there.
So this is one of my favorite slides that we have. This is an actual survey that we did in our community in high schools ages 10 to 19. I myself went out to many high schools. We got 285 responses in this survey. So we like to look at this survey and we compare it to the recruitment of trafficking victims and the grooming. So if we look at this, the first one, we asked, what are the top 3 social media platforms that you use? 88% of youth said that they are using Snapchat as at least one of their top 3. 79% said Instagram. And 76 actually said TikTok. So for those of you who don't know what TikTok is, it's kind of like a video app. People post anywhere from 30 to 3-minute videos. They can do live streams, stuff like that. And then 4% actually said that they don't use any of those and they use other social media platforms. Then we asked, have you ever had an online conversation with someone that you do not know in person? 77% of youth in our community said yes, they have chatted with strangers online. 23% said nope, never had a conversation with them at all. So the next part is filling a need. You might not be able to read these, but we asked, if yes, why did you feel comfortable talking to these people? These are very hard to read with the fact that youth are actually thinking these things and this is their understanding. So yes, because he was 25, so he was mature. Just because we would FaceTime, and I knew he wasn't an old man. I didn't feel threatened at all. They were nice. I'm never gonna meet them in real life anyways, and they were pretty. I felt safe because they were faking who they are and not like they were gonna find out where I live. Those are some of the things that youth said and reasons on why they talk to strangers online. That's pretty scary. If we look at Matthew Diaco, he was very young when he got into the trafficking world. He was 19. So let's use the 25-year-old example. Just because somebody's 25 and they're mature doesn't make them a safe person. So then we skip to isolation. Have you ever agreed to meet this person? 31% of youth said yes, and 69% said no. The last question we asked that we compare with abuse and exploitation was, have you or someone you know ever felt pressured to do someone a favor to receive something in return? So this could be drugs, alcohol, any type of gift or anything that they're gonna receive. 46% of youth said yes, and 54% said no, they haven't. Okay, so now we have the coercion and manipulation and exploitation. So if we look at manipulation and control, what they're gonna get is mixed messages from traffickers, emotional highs and lows, disobedience is punished, compliance is rewarded, with pressure to be in the good books. Traffickers are gonna start isolating victims, so they are gonna remove them from everybody they know. So say a trafficker has me, they're gonna start isolating me from Samantha and everybody that I care about. Well, I'm the only person you need, I'm giving you this. They're gonna isolate you from everything and everyone that you know. Then we have traffickers' emotional, physical, psychological abuse becomes more prevalent. You're gonna start seeing those happening more. Then the exploitation, the boundaries are broken, they're gone. There's gonna be threats to safety. So a great example is Tamaya Najee. She's a woman who was brought over here. She was trafficked in Toronto. She got out. But one of the threats that was given to her, well, is if you try to leave, I'm gonna pour boiling oil on you and throw you in Lake Ontario and they'll never find you. Imagine someone saying that to you, you're gonna do what they want. They're going to use threats like that are very aggressive to get their point across. Then we have the emotional and the physical abuse and the threats to safety, isolation, internalization of low self-worth, financial pressure. So they could make up debts that you owe to them so that you have to keep giving them more and more money and you're left with very little or none. Then we have the learned helplessness as well. So some of her thoughts may look like, well, I don't know how he's changed, but if I don't have him, I don't have anybody. That's the isolation aspect right there. If I don't have him, then I don't have anybody. So they're being isolated. And then I have to do what he says or else. There's that fear there.
So oftentimes people who are in trafficking situations, when they're trying to get out, people ask them, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you get out of here sooner? And there's a lot of factors that go into it. A lot of the time, there's that trauma bond that's built with the trafficker and the victim. So they believe that it's an intimate relationship. There's also the psychological control. The trafficker has a lot of control over the victim for fear that they're going to lose their shelter or their source of income or just that love. There's also the dependence on a trafficker to feed addiction. A lot of the times, trafficking victims become dependent on substances to kind of get them through what they're going through, or traffickers will put them on drugs so that way then they're able to stay up longer and go for longer periods of time. Sometimes victims will stay awake for 21 days straight, so that way then the trafficker can make a profit for 21 days straight. There's also the stigma that surrounds trafficking. So a lot of the times people are afraid to come forward because people are going to look down upon them, or there's that uncertainty regarding human trafficking, the feeling of not being understood by mainstream society. There's also the physical violence or threats to safety. So like Cheyenne said, traffickers will try to intimidate their victims. They'll make them scared for their own safety, tell them if you get away, I will be right there behind you and I will do everything in my power to make you stay with me. There's the trauma bond that gets created. There's the reluctance to report to the police because there's that distrust of the police. A lot of the times, people who are trafficking victims are afraid to go to the police because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble at the end of the day, that they're going to face charges for what they went through. There's also the fear of repercussions from traffickers or associates of the traffickers. So what we see even in our community is that victims are afraid to be out in public because they're afraid that their trafficker is going to see them if they're walking down the street, or they're afraid that anywhere they go, they could be around the corner. There's also the fear of criminalization. There's language barriers. There's also threats to family members. So one way that traffickers try to intimidate their victims is they say, if you get out of this business, or if you get away from me, I will go and find your family. I will go and find your kids. Anything like that, just to cause that intimidation. There's also debt bonds, and then there's poverty. So if somebody leaves the business, they're afraid that they're not going to know how to get back into this world, how to create money, or how to gain money back at the end of the day. So you might be asking yourself, who is at risk? So anyone can be targeted, groomed, or exploited, manipulated, or coerced. Traffickers look for somebody who has a vulnerability at the end of the day. So a victim can be a woman, a girl, it can be a boy, it can be a man. They don't pick a certain type of person. It could be victims of poverty, people who experience discrimination, marginalized groups, people who are part of the 2SL LGBTQX plus 2A community, those who are Indigenous, those who are involved in the child welfare system, those who experience low self-esteem, those who have a prior history of abuse, hopelessness, or people who don't have housing. It could also be a newcomer to the country, somebody who's a part of a minority group, people who have mental illnesses, or people who have precarious immigration statuses. Like, it can be anybody. It's not just looking at young girls or women. It can be anybody in the community.
Statistically, we know, though, in our community, it's a lot of the time girls, because there are many types of trafficking. But we're seeing the sex trafficking, which is huge. So, some indicators. If you are talking to a youth in the community, or you see a youth in the community that you know, these are just a few indicators. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some things that may stick out and make you go, something's not right. So we have having a new or a second cell phone when they may not be able to even afford one. Having money, clothes, hair, nails done, hotel room, keys, fake IDs, anything like that that again can't be explained. Being secretive about the people they're surrounding themselves with. Withdrawing from previously enjoyed activities or friend groups, so they loved soccer, super athletic, and now they want nothing to do with it. They spent time by themselves, and that's it. Then we have only using Uber or taxis to get to and from school. That's a huge one. Having a new tattoo. With trafficking, we see a lot of branding. So what branding can be, it could be the trafficker's name. We also see barcodes. So if you see someone with a barcode tattooed on them, that is a sign that they may be in trafficking or they may have gotten out of trafficking. Somebody who goes missing repeatedly. How many of you see the kids that are posted all the time for going missing? I know I do on Facebook. My first thought always is, have they been trafficked? Because that is very common for a youth who goes missing repeatedly. Skipping class and/or a sudden change in their academic performance. Exhibiting knowledge of the commercial sex trade via their language. So in the video, they talk about the game. That is what trafficking is called. So if a youth is talking about the game, or they're talking about a bill, which is a $100 bill, if they're using some of these terms, that's a little bit of a red flag, because most people don't know these terms. We also have having explicitly sexual online profiles. Evidence of drug use, so this could be track marks or their eyes you can look at, so just some evidence. And then showing evidence of control, intimidation, or psychological fear. So fear of displeasing their partner. So any of these can be an indicator that somebody is at risk or being trafficked. So this is the power and control wheel. When we look at trafficking, a trafficker wants two things: power and control. They want the power and control over these youth, these women, and these people. So there's 6 different sections of it. We have the economic abuse. We have the coercion and the threats, which is a huge aspect of it. The intimidation. The emotional abuse. So if you leave me, you don't have anybody. You have to stay. Saying things like this, where there's that emotional abuse, or you're crazy, no one's gonna believe you. Then the isolation, where they're being isolated from everybody, and the sexual abuse, because we know with trafficking, there is a lot of sexual abuse.
Okay, so you might be asking yourself, who are the traffickers? So human trafficking is a lucrative criminal activity for traffickers, as it is a relatively low risk thing. And it generates a significant amount of revenue. Human trafficking brings in a lot of money, unfortunately, at the end of the day. Traffickers may be a part of an organized criminal network, or they may be operating independently. So a trafficker can be anyone. It can be a family member. It could be a family member, a family friend. It could be somebody in the community. It's not limited to just one specific type of person. Traffickers can be employed, they can be professionals, or they can be unemployed. And then traffickers deliberately present themselves in ways that gain the victim's trust. So it could be as a friend, as a boyfriend, as a family friend, somebody in a position of power. So traffickers can be any ethnicity, any age. They can have a history of abuse and violence. They can have a job. They don't have to have a job. There's that power status that they look for. They can be independent. Sometimes they can be gang members, family members, or an intimate partner. And greed and profit is the motivation when it comes to human trafficking at the end of the day.
Before we move on, I have a question for everybody. If you had to take a guess, how much money do you think it makes a year in Canada? Any ideas? It's high. I want to hear some numbers. Not far off. Any other guesses? Higher. $150 billion a year traffickers are making. $150 billion. That's a big number. And they say that at any time in Canada, there are 17,000 girls and women being trafficked. So those 17,000 people are making $150 billion a year for these traffickers, and not by choice. Yeah. So how would you be able to tell if somebody is becoming a trafficker? Like if you had a family member and you were seeing some signs, what signs would you look for to believe that someone was in the field of trafficking? That's a tricky question.
Repeat the question.
Yep. You're getting put on the spot. This is my best friend, by the way, so she's allowed to be put on the spot.
So my question was, how would you identify or see any signs if you believed a family member or a close friend of yours was in the field of trafficking? So if you had an uncle, let's say, and things just didn't seem right, what would be the signs that you would look for to see, oh, this person might be getting in the field of being a trafficker? So that was my question. It's a tricky one.
No, that's a good question. I'm glad that you asked that. We've never had this conversation either, so I'm pretty shocked by this. So in that situation, there's so many signs. I mean, if this person is now always hanging out with different girls, young girls, or suddenly they're going missing for days and they happen to be on a trip that doesn't make sense, or if suddenly this person has money, that is huge. Somebody who may have been living paycheck to paycheck and now they just brought a brand new Lamborghini. They're buying everything name brand. Somebody who is suddenly coming into money and spending a lot of money. So those are just a few signs that you could tell that somebody's trafficking. Yeah, so Samantha just made a great point. Somebody who has experienced some form of sexual trauma in their childhood, that can also be a huge trigger. I know, for example, Matthew Dyko. He was sexually assaulted when he was a kid. Now he's a trafficker. That's not saying that's right, but it can affect somebody enough that this is what they do. Absolutely. I mean, if I go and hang out with a bunch of girls who I don't know are being trafficked, I'm probably going to get sucked in. Yeah. So what can you do? I know that it's hard to think of what we can do as one person. Start a conversation. Have these conversations with family members and friends. My best friend who's here, we've had many conversations, but we've never had a conversation kind of like this. Having these conversations is so important. You want people to be educated and to know what the risk is and what this looks like, because it is happening here. Being aware of who children in your life are talking to online. Really just being aware, know who they're talking to. If they're strangers, have conversations with them. Raise awareness of human trafficking. This could be by volunteering. This could be by sharing a post on Facebook that you see. Get involved. So again, volunteering. We always take volunteers. Volunteer with an organization that helps with human trafficking and educate yourself. Teach the children in your life about healthy relationships and consent. Consent is huge. Obviously, with trafficking, there's no consent there. Teach them about these things. What should a healthy relationship look like? And leave lines of communication open with children. We don't want children to think that they can't talk to us about this because, well, you're not very open. Leave those lines open. Let them know that they can talk to you about anything. It's a safe space. Any questions at all before I kind of move on to some articles I have based in Sarnia?
They no longer wanted to do the survey, even though we brought them home with chicken nuggets. But they didn't want to because they didn't want to get in trouble. And so that communication, being aware of your attitude, being aware of how you communicate, being aware of doing it without judgment, without blame, without negative emotions, even though you may not agree with what they're doing, is more important than to have them communicate with you, because that was a very prevalent thing that we saw when we simply just by talking to someone who might have very short exposure to that.
Absolutely, that's a huge point too. And it's scary for a youth to talk to someone that they trust, someone that they look up to about something like this. So what I want to mention is at the center now, we are able to sit down with a youth, the parents, or the family and have these hard conversations. Let them know that as an organization, if you have questions, you can come right to me and we can have these conversations, or I can answer those questions for you. Sometimes they don't know how to ask their parents. Sometimes they feel like they can't. That is huge. We want some form of communication to happen because we don't want them to feel like they have to shut down because mom or dad doesn't know or grandma doesn't know any of this.
Whoever in your family of what they're doing, but to educate them that it's not safe to do be aware of the signs that you talked about, and also make your child feel as though that they can come to you. You're not going to sit there and judge her and be like, well, that's not right, don't do that. But sit there and be like, you know what, it's not the safest, so I want you to keep me up to date on what's going on, because you want to know what's going on in your child's life. But you also don't want to come off as being that person that's very much unsafe. The unsafe, yeah.
So I'm going to pick on you for a second. You say that there's a lot of judgment. How did you feel when you felt that judgment?
Very much outcast. That I wanted to explore meeting new people, but everybody else in my family was very much secluded and shut down. They didn't want to. That's not how they did it. They didn't meet people online. They went outside and met people. So I felt very judged.
So you're judged and you feel like an outcast. Some kids are going to take that and go online to meet even more strangers because they're an outcast now. Their family doesn't get it. They're judging. So now they're going to go online and meet more strangers, and that's a vulnerability right there. What were to happen if 10-year-old you turned around and was talking to somebody and said, yeah, my family really doesn't like that I'm talking to strangers online. They made me feel like an outcast. That trafficker is going to jump right in and be like, well, I got you. We're going to be best friends. We're going to date. We're going to do this. And they're going to sell you that dream. Any other? Yeah.
How young are these kids? Like, I have great-grandchildren that are 10 and 11, and I'm totally out of it. But I would like to know how young are these kids when they start doing all this?
Any age. I know kids who are 5 years old and have cell phones and access to social media. 5 years old, which means they can now access. And a lot of parents don't turn privacy settings on. Not all, but a lot of parents don't know how or may not understand what is actually happening online. So there's that issue as well, right? But statistically, we're seeing 13, 14 years old in Sarnia, but all ages. It can be as young as 4 years old that are being trafficked. Okay, so I just have a couple articles I just wanted to briefly talk about that have to do with Sarnia. We have not had many charges laid in Sarnia at all for trafficking. As far as I'm aware, the first one was actually in 2015. They got 9 years for trafficking, and it was actually a 22-year-old Toronto man who was in Sarnia and had trafficked a young girl. So she was 19, and she was taken to a hotel from Toronto and brought here where she was supposed to prostitute herself. There was a call made, and they ended up arresting the man, and he was charged. And that was the first charge laid in Sarnia, and that was 2015. We know that this has been going on way before that, but that is huge to say that Sarnia even has a charge laid. There was also another victim who was rescued in 2017. 2 people were charged in this one. Sarnia police actually received a tip from the Lambton OPP. It was a 19-year-old female and the 2 accused who were from Peel Region in Toronto. A lot of the time we're seeing Toronto people come down, and that's where the trafficking is happening from or they're being taken to. So the woman was forced to hand over all the money she made and had been threatened and assaulted. So that was in 2017. They ended up making that arrest as well. So they were charged in Sarnia. And then there was another in 2018. There was a 17-year-old who was stuck in trafficking. If she hadn't been locked out of her hotel room and made the call to the police to be let back in, those people never would have been arrested. But there was 2 people arrested as well in that case. These are 3 cases from the news that have been posted over the years that have been public knowledge. We are charging, but it's very, very hard if we remember back to the act, the means, and the purpose. It takes a lot to get the charges, but we are doing it, and that is the most important piece. We need to work together as a community to try and educate and stop this, because it is an issue and it is extremely underreported. We know that was very heavy. Does anybody have any comments to finish up? Any questions at all? Yeah.
You know, when they were visible in the sign in the window. I don't know, just off the cuff, is there anything you can do, like, as block parents who, I don't know,
Can you repeat the question?
somehow keep these kids safe or announce to the community you're not welcome here, the traffickers, or something along that line?
Absolutely. So if not everybody heard it, the question was, is there anything that we can do in our neighborhoods to really make a stand? So for example, the neighborhood parents, absolutely. Being in a position like that, if you know everybody in your neighborhood, you like everybody, you get along, absolutely have that conversation. This is something that we should do, we should be monitoring, because if one car is coming in and out of the neighborhood that looks at a place and you know isn't around, from around there, that's a huge red flag right there. Also, if you are out in the community and you see something and you get what we call the auto feeling, something doesn't feel right, please call either us, call the Sarnia Police non-emergency line, call somebody and make them aware, because you never know if that young girl walking with the 40-year-old man down the street that doesn't look right, it doesn't look like a parental figure, you never know if that's a trafficker or not. You can call us. We can answer questions for you if you're seeing something in the community, but if you have major concerns, you can call Sarnia Police.
A lot of people have nowadays with houses is having cameras, and it's like that. I think that'd be a great thing to have, like the community watch, but having like a sign posted in your window saying, you know, you have cameras. I mean, that's the reason my family got cameras, not only for our own safety, but the fact that my parents, because of you, are so educated in human trafficking that we do have a lot of strange vehicles that we don't see in our neighborhood quite often. So the reason why we got cameras is if we needed evidence for anything, it was because they had kids, and there are kids in our neighborhood. We want to be able to know that if a kid went missing in our neighborhood, we can look back at our cameras and see if there was a strange car, a strange person that doesn't live in the neighborhood. So something like that, very beneficial, especially for...
Absolutely, that is huge too. Cameras.
Could you repeat what she said?
Yeah, so she explained that. So
you did this.